It is not very advisable to stay in a house where you have a landlord that is always hungry. There are some landlords that will even tell their tenants to pay them for the next year, pay them part payment for the next year. There are some landlords that will even come to borrow from their tenants and tell them that at the next rent we will deduct it. When it gets to that next rent that you want to deduct, it becomes a problem. So it is best that if you have a career landlord, you give him his money. If he doesn't want to understand you, then you look for another way instead of you to wait for trouble to come and meet you. For every tenant and for every landlord, it is expedient that once you decide to contract, decide to part away with money, or you decide to part away with possession, you have a written agreement that is binding on the parties. For every tenant, once you're entering into a contractual relationship with the land, you don't just sign any document blindly, sign it as if you're taking Goskolo. If you want to sign a document, if you don't know how to read or write, it is imperative that you get a lawyer that will go through that document and explain things to you before you sign. As a tenant, what you ought to do is to pay your rent when you're supposed to pay it. Once you pay your rent when you're supposed to pay it, then the law shields you. But if you're in arrears of rent and you're still claiming rights, you have a long way to go. Then go pack your property, go drop for court.
Welcome to Ebenezer TV Podcast. We want to say a very big thank you to all our followers and subscribers. A very big thank you from us to you. Today, I have two personalities. One happens to be my co-host. Indeed, she's a special being. She's fine. If you have problem, meet her. She will help you out. All is there ahead. I introduce to you May.
It feels so good to be here, and I promise you today's podcast is really going to blow your mind.
Indeed, we look the chronics of Nigeria and we decided to go into this particular being. He's a godsend to Nigeria. The Odogu one, I call him the law because of what we are to do today.
Exactly.
I introduce to you Barrister Amarachi.
Well, your introduction always swept me off my feet. It feels good to be here. I've been looking forward to being on this program. I follow you people online and I see the effort you put in to ensure that Nigerians get educated and entertained. Here I am today to ensure that I give my own beat and make the program as exciting as it should be.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are looking at a very important topic, and it's all about tenancy. The laws that guide tenants and house owners, which happens to be landlords. I know some of us get problem on our houses. So sit down as we begin to go into the topic. Sit down and understand and learn as we go further. Sir, before we go further, I want you to help us on giving an insight what tenancy means and agreement itself.
Okay, that's a good question. Tenancy, when you want to talk about tenancy, you cannot take away a landlord and a tenant relationship. One, you have someone who owns the house and someone who wants to rent that place or live in that place. Everybody in life will have a need for an accommodation. It is either you're the owner of that house as a result of you purchasing that property or as a result of you living in that property after making the necessary payments. So tenancy agreement comes in place when the landlord who owns the house decides to let that house to someone who wants to stay in that premises that is willing to part with his money while he parts away with his possession. Okay. Now, you can be the owner of the house, but you cannot be in possession of the house because you're not living in that house at the moment. If you allow a tenant to reside in that house, then that means you're parting away with the possession of that house at that moment until that tenancy expires. So when the coming together of a landlord and a tenant takes place, you now have a form of agreement that will regulate their relationship. Regulating their relationship is where the tenancy agreement now comes in. This states the clauses that bind the landlord and the tenants together, the do's and don'ts between the landlord and the tenant. So that tenancy agreement is what defines in total the relationship between the landlord and the tenant.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this insight that you have been given. Now, sir, I have different questions, and it is being segmented into different forms. Now, I want to ask, is there any special written agreement between a tenant and a landlord?
Yes, that is what I've been trying to explain. That's the tenancy agreement.
Okay.
Now, for every tenant and for every landlord, it is expedient that once you decide to contract, decide to part away with money, or you decide to part away with possession, you have a written agreement that is binding on the parties, which is the tenancy agreement. You cannot do away with the tenancy agreement, because if there is no tenancy agreement, then the relationship between the landlord and tenant will be left to be explained by the court based on the existing laws. And those existing laws might not cover what the parties would have decided to bind them. Now, the law gives you a free hand to regulate your relationship by bringing in terms that will govern that relationship. Okay. So if you do not put a written document in place, which is the tenancy agreement, that means you've left that the agreement between the parties to be interpreted based on the existing laws in the land at that time.
Okay. So it is said that it is better you understand what tenancy agreement means. So, sir, I have another question for you, and I want to ask, what are the notice period for termination of tenancy?
Well, I will take you straight from the agreement, then we'll go to the notice period. Now, when you meet the landlord and the agreement is prepared, the agreement states at times the notice that each tenant is meant to be served with before the tenancy is determined. You understand? But ordinarily, as a result of our various laws, recovery of premises laws, tenancy laws of each of the states, which do not differ from each other like that. They are almost the same kind of legislation that has been written down. Now, the tenancy laws stipulate that for a yearly tenant, you're entitled to 6 months' notice.
Okay.
For monthly tenants, you're entitled to a month's notice. Then weekly tenants, a week notice. It depends. Now, some landlords prefer to rent their house out for a year. Some others decide to rent their house out a month. Outside the country, you find people paying monthly for their tenants. Some people's rent ranges up to $1,000 outside this country. So you know you're enjoying in Nigeria, you're flexing here. So, however, our living conditions and theirs cannot be compared with. So, as it stands, that is what the law stipulates. However, I should add, because a lot of tenants are getting the misconception that the 6 months notice will be given to you after the expiration of your rent. So it's never like that.
Okay.
Now, if a landlord intends to eject a tenant and there are no specific regulations as per how the notices should be issued, that 6 months notice will be issued together with the duration of your rent. Okay. So immediately your rent is expiring, the notice expires, so that you already know that you're supposed to leave that premises at the expiration of your rent. Because once your rent expires, there is no contractual obligation on the part of the landlord to fulfill for you to fulfill to the landlord. You're more like a tenant at will because you have no contractual obligation with the landlord. Now, there are some agreements where the landlord and the tenants agree that the tenant will not be entitled to the statutory notices, which is 6 months notice or 3 months. That in a nutshell, it means that at the expiration of your tenancy, the landlord has the power to give you 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover premises. Okay. That's the last notice you're being served with before an action is instituted in court against you to recover the premises. Because as you know, our law does not permit a landlord to take laws into their hands by throwing the tenant's property off. The only way you can recover your premises after putting a tenant in possession is by going to the court to get an order of court to eject that tenant if the tenant proves so stubborn to leave that place. So for every tenant, once you're entering into a contractual relationship with the land, you don't just sign any document blindly. Sign it as if you're taking Goskolo. If you want to sign a document, if you don't know how to read or write, it is imperative that you get a lawyer that will go through that document and explain things to you before you sign. Because the law is that if you sign any document, knowing the form of the document without truly knowing the content of that document is binding on you. So for you to know that, it means you have to read everything that comes your way before you sign. So tenancy agreement determines the relationship between landlord and tenant aside our laws. So if you want to be further bound and you don't want the law to be stricto sensu applied in your case, then you have a tenancy agreement that regulates your relationship.
All right, thank you so much. So it is already said that you understand the concept of your tenancy agreement according to what our lawyer is saying here. Now, sir, I have another question for you. Is there any legal law that backs terms of payment in terms of tenant and landlord payment?
Well, our tenancy laws are not as expressive as one should want to perceive them. The beginning of the relationship, the basis of the tenancy is that you pay a certain rent that has been prescribed and the property is given to you. Now, and that rent you're paying will be for a duration. If you're paying your rent on the 1st of January, it is expected that that rent will terminate on the 31st of December. That is one whole year. Okay. Now, if I'm paying a rent on maybe let's say 2nd of January, that rent will terminate 1st of January the next year. Okay. Now, your rent is supposed to terminate on the eve of the day you made your payment. That's when your rent is supposed to terminate. Now, there's no hard and fast rule as to how payment is made, but the only thing is that you should pay your rent as and when due to avoid embarrassment. You understand? If you know that your rent is going to be due, there's nothing that stops you from paying your rent when you need to pay. If you don't have the money, there's nothing that stops you from approaching your landlord to tell him, this is what I'm being faced with. I do not have the capacity now, but I can pay in this. If he accepts it, fine. Then you go ahead and pay. But you don't just lock up. You just be like, say nothing will happen. You lock up to yourself and you just feel like when the rent expires, and landlord going to pursue me from one place to another. It doesn't work like that. The landlord is a human being. You approach him, you tell him what you're going through, and you people proffer solutions. You see how to. If you have been a tenant that is committed to paying his rent at the appropriate time, there is no landlord that will be unreasonable not to understand what you're going through at that moment.
Sorry to cut you
help
off.
you.
There are some landlords that they don't care about your challenge.
Well, it depends on the house.
They want to have their money. Their own is their money. They don't care about the challenge you're facing.
Well,
they want to make sure that you leave the house. Well, they don't care about your challenges or whatever you face. So how do such tenants work towards this type of thing?
Well, let us say you are living in a house where you have a career landlord. Okay. You know, what I mean by career landlord is people who don't have other jobs, whose source of livelihood resides in that property that has been let out to you. So if you're living in that kind of house, you be prepared to pay your rent when it's due because the landlord will not hear shit. And the law doesn't permit you to now say, I don't have the money, you'll be patient with me. There's nothing like if you don't pay your rent when you're supposed to pay, the necessary notices will be issued to you, you'll be dragged to court, and your things will be thrown out. And let me even make you understand better. If you're dragged to court and you stay there for a year, and you feel you're not going to pay, you pay, they'll collect the money from your account directly because they do garnishing proceedings too. Or they will come. You see some persons, upholstery, furnitures and all are in court. That's a result of the landlord getting judgment when you still reside in that property. They will come to your house with the bailiff of court. They will levy execution on you. They'll pack everything. They'll pack everything and go to court. And they will sell it for mega prices that you can't even fathom. Wow. So it is best that if you have a career landlord, you give him his money. If he doesn't want to understand you, then you look for another way instead of you to wait for trouble to come and meet you. You understand? Though the landlord and tenant laws in Nigeria favor the tenants, but the landlord takes the necessary steps that he ought to take, the tenant will be crying at the end of the day.
Okay, so I want to ask about increment. There are some landlords that will just come up on their own. Bah, I want to increase house rent.
Okay.
What can the tenant do concerning that? I entered into an apartment this year. The following year, you want to increase?
My brother, there is no law that stops the landlord from increasing his rent how he wants. I'm coming to that. I'll define that. There's no law that states that the landlord has a fixed time or a duration or a period by which he will increase his rent. You can enter the house this year and the landlord will decide to increase the rent next year. It is at his own discretion. You understand? However, every notice that pertains to rent increment must be written and must be given within a reasonable time. When I mean reasonable time, you give the tenant sufficient notice to prepare himself and check his finances to ensure that he can be able to pay. You will not wait till maybe 1 month to the expiration of the rent or weeks to the expiration of the rent. Then you come with one unreasonable notice to say you're increasing rent. If that tenant decides to challenge that rent increase in court, you lose the matter. But as it stands, the landlord has the discretion to increase his rent. However, the increment of rent must be reasonable. Okay. You do not increase the rent more than 100%. The increment of rent must be gradual and reasonable. Now, some landlords, seeing that they cannot increase the rent beyond what they want, they tend to serve the tenants quick notice, claiming that they want to make use of the house so that the tenant will leave. Let them give that new rent price to the new tenants that is coming. It is all taxes. So however it is, wisdom is profitable. If you see a rent increase that is not favorable to you and you like where you're staying, there's nothing that stops you from calling your landlord.
Okay.
You call him, you have a meeting, and you tell him, see, this is my financial state at the moment. I cannot be able to pay that rent. And you look at the prevailing rent for that kind of building that you're staying in your environment. You look at how much other people pay. You also bring it to the landlord's attention. And if the landlord is reasonable, you can reach a consensus. Now, in tenancy agreement, there is what we call rent review clause. Now, it states that the landlord ought to write to the tenant telling him when he wants to increase the rent, and if the tenant is not satisfied, he meets the landlord to tell him, I am not satisfied. And if they cannot come to a compromise, the tenant will have to look for another place. There's property I'm managing. There's a property I'm managing presently. I wrote a notice of rent increase to them. I somehow delayed to write that notice of rent increase at the necessary time. So some persons did not get sufficient notice. They got 1 month notice, while others have 6 to 7 month notice of rent increase. And of course, rent increase also comes with notice to quit at the end.
Yes.
Stating that if you cannot pay the new rent, I brought a vamoose from my property. Nothing stops you. So the tenants got a hold of the rent increase form that I served on them, and they called me. They said it is not that we don't have the capacity to pay, some of them, but the notice you brought to us is such that we cannot pay at the moment because our rent is already due and we have already prepared the rent to pay. So I approached the landlord. I told him, for these persons that their rent is already due, let them pay the old rent. For the other persons that have sufficient notice, they have no excuse. So that goes to tell you that you must give the tenant sufficient notice in order for you not to fall into some legal loopholes. So,
okay. According to our lawyer, it's very, very important to have these ideas and also have a mutual relationship with your landlord. Possibly, if it is the lawyer, you have mutual relationship with him. But sir, I have another question to throw to you. I want to ask, is there any means of payment between the tenant and the landlord? Like any means that is backed by law, that this is how house rent is supposed to be paid?
No. As in relation to that, there is no hard and fast rule as per how rent should be paid. You can decide to pay your rent in cash. You can decide to pay your rent through transfer. But it is advisable that as someone in a digital age, you pay your rent through transfer in order for you to have receipt of the transaction.
Okay.
You carry 1 million naira, can't give me, no get receipt. If I deny you, what you want, you go kill me. So as a reasonable person, you ought to have a receipt of that transaction so that the landlord will not deny at a later date. And when you pay that rent, you ought to demand for a receipt from the landlord showing that you've made payment for that year. After that receipt is being given, you also ought to ask for a tenancy relationship that backs that agreement. Because what is stated in the tenancy is what would determine when the landlord wants to be arbitrary. Now, arbitrary is maybe the landlord will wake up one day and say, I don't like this person's face, or this Ebenezer guy don't do, they make noise, bless him, don't get money past me, let him come and leave my property, or I get the way when they look my daughter, I not too like him, you understand, all those kind of things. He might just wake up one day and feel that you're causing nuisance because he does not like the way you appear again. So in such instances, if you have a tenancy agreement, he cannot just wake up one morning and throw you out of the premises. So the tenancy agreement backs the kind of relationship between the parties and backs the mood of eviction of that tenant. You understand? For some tenancy agreement, you see that the tenant is not supposed to engage in occultic activities. Some might say you are not supposed to own dogs and other pets in the compound. So some might also say you're not supposed to cause nuisance to other tenants or do things that might put the house in danger. If you're kidnapper and you're staying in my house, I have the right to, once I have evidence, I have the right to throw you out of my house so that government won't come and lock up the place. You understand? So yes, that is how it works.
All right, sir. There are some challenges that I think we tenants we do have. When you go to rent an apartment, they will tell you that pay your rent, I will fix this, I will fix this, I will fix this. And eventually you've made the payment. But when you eventually want to pack into that particular place, those things are not fixed. What can the tenant do in respect to that?
Okay, this is a very interesting area. Yes, I've seen this a couple of times. I've even rented one house to someone that we are yet to fix everything. So I met the person. I went to the property with the person and she showed me the things that ought to be fixed. So for some of them, like the wardrobe has not been fixed. And the landlady has expressly told me that, you see that wardrobe, I never get money to fix her. She has expressly confided. So I told the tenant that if you're waiting for this wardrobe to be fixed, then you're not ready to pack into this house. The only thing I would do with the landlady is to tell her that you will fix this wardrobe. Then whatever cost that you incur will be deducted from the next year's rent. You understand? Now, it takes us to the point where if a tenant wants to fix anything in the house, it has to be with the written consent of the landlord. Now, if you really love the place and you want to go into that apartment and you see that the landlord has not fixed the things that you've agreed to fix, there's no need to. It's either you tell him to give you back your money to look for another place, or you decide to fix those things with his consent. Now, you people take a breakdown of the things that needs to be fixed, and you expressly agree that these things that are going to be fixed will be deducted from the next rent. This is expressly agreed. If you go and fix it by yourself without his written consent, or here is your case, you've repaired his house for him. And of course, you know the law also states that you cannot make alterations to someone's house without his permission, because you're not the owner of the house, you're just an occupant. So whenever you want to make any alteration in the house, you need the landlord's permission. And if you need the money to be refunded to you, then it has to be expressly stated.
Okay. Yes. A question to you now is, who is reliable for the damages or losses?
Damages in what sense?
Like any damage in the property.
Okay, that brings me to the first point. There's something that I was supposed to say at the beginning, that when you come into a property, there are certain payments you make. You pay the tenancy fee. You're going to the property. For the new ones that I've seen, they'll give you a form, you fill out of details and all. Pay the rent, then you pay. Some people collect agent fee too. Some landlords do not collect. Some people collect drinking money, which is not even in our laws. I don't know what they want to drink, whether it's ogogoro or it's palm wine. So some people collect drinking money. Then some people also collect legal fee, because the lawyer will prepare the agreement, and each tenancy agreement states that the burden of the tenancy agreement, the preparation of the tenancy agreement will be borne by the tenant. Now, it means that if the tenancy agreement is prepared whatever the cost is, the tenant is the one that is supposed to pay for it. Now you pay the legal fee and you pay caution deposit. Now that caution fee is a refundable caution deposit. It might range from 50, 100, 200,000 depending on the kind of house that you're in. You understand? If you are entering an already made house and things are very expensive there, of course the caution fee will be higher. But that caution fee will be refundable to you at the end of your tenancy. That is if you do not destroy anything in the house. You don't go to someone's house and start damaging things that have been put. Because of course I'll take stock of my house before you come in. If you come and scatter everything, my brother, even though that your caution fee is not up to, we'll still hold you to come and pay more. I won't bear the burden of any tenant, you understand? Yes. So that is how it works. As a tenant, you handle poor people's property as if you're handling your own property. Now, if there is an act of God in the property, maybe you have thunder or flood or something and part of the property is damaged, of course the landlord has the responsibility of taking care of his property. If there are structural defects that are not caused by the negligence of the tenant, the landlord has the responsibility of fixing it. If your roof is bad, ceiling is bad and all of that, the landlord will fix it. But if you have plumbing issues, if you don't shit, they won't park shit for soccer away. They call landlord. You don't mad though. You cannot be calling the landlord to come and park your shit. No. You contribute money with other tenants and you park it because that's something you utilize. You understand? Yes. The landlord will only be responsible to contribute with the tenant if he occupies a part of that property and his defecation also goes into that soccer away. You understand? So yes. There are minor things. You cannot have electrical faults in your house and you'll be calling the landlord. You're very, very mad. So there are things that as a tenant, you know that these are the things I should do. If you don't have water in your compound, you not start calling landlord to come and pump water for you.
Some people are like that.
But if you people contribute, you join hands together, you conspire and you scatter the tank up, you tell landlord to come and buy a new tank. It's not possible. But if the tank falls on its own, or maybe as a result of wear and tear, that tank has expired. Because everything, I tell people that there's nothing in life that doesn't have expiring date. So long as humans, our life also have expiring date. There's nothing in life, electronics or whatever you have, that doesn't have their own expiration date. So if that tank has expired and it has fallen to the ground, of course, it's the landlord's responsibility to fix it. So we know the distinction. If you're causing a major damage by your negligence, that stands as a ground for you to be ejected from that premises. And that also stands as a ground for you to repair what the landlord ordinarily is supposed to repair.
That's true. Very, very important thing to notice.
Yeah.
Okay, can a landlord evict a tenant just without notice?
Oh, no, it's not possible.
Why?
It's not possible.
It's not possible.
The law stipulates how a tenant should be evicted. I can confidently tell you that if a tenant does not leave the house on his own free will, the landlord will have a lot on his hands to get that tenant out of the house. Now, this is how it plays. If I'm fed up with the tenant and I want to eject that tenant, or we cannot come to a compromise as regards the rent increase, I will be forced to take the laws in my hands and eject that tenant. Now, like I told you, there are statutory notices that are stipulated from the beginning. Okay. If you have issued that notice when you're supposed to, and the agreement does not state that that notice should be waived, you have issued that notice, the 6 months notice for a yearly tenant. What the tenant will be entitled to after the expiration of the rent will be 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover premises. Like I told you from the beginning, that's the last notice before you go to court. If you do not serve that notice on the tenant, you cannot maintain a legal court proceeding. All your actions will fail until you serve that notice. Now, the notice says 7 days notice of owner's intention. This might not be, but for people that are also in the legal field, I might serve you 7 days notice of owner's intention. And before the expiration of that 7 days, I take the matter to court. And you want to challenge me that the notice is not due. However, I can escape from that challenge if the matter that I filed in court was not heard before the expiration of that 7 days. So 7 days is 7 days. That 7 days notice of owner's intention should be 7 clear days. But I've told you an exception to it if you follow that. After you serve the 7 days notice of owner's intention, it doesn't give you the right throw away the tenants' things. I see some foolish landlord going to remove roof, or you go and you see a door that has padlock, you now put two padlock and lock the tenant. You're taking laws into it. That tenant has the right to arrest you and charge you because you've taken laws into it. It's a criminal offense. They are recently on Nigerian Info. They reported a case of a landlord going to remove his tenant's roof for rent that just expired not up to 2 weeks or thereabout. And the tenant arrested him. And the police have come out to say that we are going to prosecute this matter to the end to serve as a deterrent to all landlords. I know we have a lot of stubborn tenants. Tenants have made up their mind that I'm going to punish this landlord. There are so many of them like that. One of them, his name starts with Eva, who mentioned himself. But there are tenants like that. They are very stubborn tenants. They say we'll punish this landlord. If you meet tenants like that, ensure that you follow the legal means of getting them out. If not, you box yourself in a corner that will be very difficult for you to come out. Now, someone called me last 2 weeks, yes. She said the tenant has moved to another apartment, but the tenant padlocked the house and left some few miserable items inside the house. Now, that tenant is looking for a situation where the landlord or the landlady will go and break that padlock. Then they will pounce on it and arrest and make them to pay. They will now say they have millions in the house. So as a landlord, you should be wise to know when a tenant is setting a trap for you. Now they serve 7 days notice to quit. They pasted it on the door of the house. The tenants did not leave. So they came to me that this is their problem. I said, don't worry. Let's serve them the last notice before we go to court. That's 7 days notice of owner's intention. So immediately we pasted that 7 days notice of owner's intention. That day, the tenant came out of the blues. She came with her husband. They opened the place. They found their things. They wanted to lock the place again. So the landlord came out and said, you can't lock this place. You no longer stay here. Give me a key. And they've already exceeded their rent by 3 months. It was a very serious matter. So that's when you follow the legal means, you see that the tenants will not be at ease. But because there are tenants that are conversant with these laws, and the only way you can follow them is by paying attention to the law. If you take a misstep, like I told you, the law favors the tenant more than the landlord. So if you take a misstep, you might find someone enjoying your property without your permission.
Okay, I have experienced something, which I think whenever there is a landlord that had issue with his tenant, he doesn't stay in the house. Whenever his rent wants to get expired, he doesn't stay around. You will see his children in the house. But anytime they want to pay the rent, you see that the landlord will come to the house. The owner who rented the house with the landlord is not available. So I want to ask, in a case where you that rented the house is not on ground to attend to the landlord when he comes for his rent, and is your family, like your children are the ones at home, what should the landlord do in a case like that?
Well, the landlord, before you let someone into your property, you have the person's number, and you have the person's information. So there's even no need for you to go and meet that person in his house, except the person is avoiding your calls. There are tenants like that. There are some tenants that have even blocked my line. You know, I manage people's properties. If I'm not managing, I'm managing up to 5 properties. And I've seen hell too. Because when they put pressure on you, when the tenants put pressure on you, the landlord will also put pressure on you because the landlord needs his rent. You understand? So if you have the tenant's number, you send him a reminder. You can do him a letter to tell him your rent is about to expire. Pay the new rent. There's no need to be confrontational. If you read that you did not see the tenant, it is also advisable that you leave and you send him a message. That message serves as a reminder. Like I told you, it is not very advisable to stay in a house where you have a landlord that is always hungry. There are some landlords that will even tell their tenants to pay them for the next year, pay them part payment for the next year. There are some landlords that will even come to borrow from their tenants and tell them that at the next rent, we will deduct it. When it gets to that next rent that you want to deduct, it becomes a problem. So if the landlord has something doing, he has something that is fetching him income, he might not even be concerned with the rent, how you pay the rent. You know, some landlords do not even increase rent. I've stayed in the house for 3 years. My landlord has not increased the rent. And sometimes I feel, what kind of mind does this man have? I'm saying a one-bedroom flat. I'm paying 300,000. And I'm saying, this man, if this man is a hungry landlord or a career landlord that has nothing else to do, the rent would have skyrocketed. But because the landlord is someone that has other things doing, when the landlord has other things doing, he also takes the tenants into consideration. There are some tenants that during the COVID-19 period, their landlord gave them a rent waiver. Their landlords even brought rice and other things for them. There are tenants like that because of the relationship. There are some tenants at the end of the year, the landlord even brings things for them, bring good and other things for them to celebrate. It just depends on the kind of personality you meet. Everybody have their own differences, but I pray you meet the right person if you don't have a house of your own though.
Okay, sir, we are going to look into termination and eviction.
Okay.
I want you to give us elaborate explanation on what termination and eviction means.
Well, termination of a tenancy can occur at any time, especially if the tenant goes against the clause binding that agreement.
Okay.
There are several clauses. If I say I don't want court activities on my premises, and every night you're coming with bad guys to be shouting Aru Aru and the rest on my property, I better have the right to reject you.
Okay.
But if you're holding some kind of parties that will be detrimental to other tenants, you're causing nuisance in the environment, and you're doing things that can damage my property, I have a right to terminate that tenancy and send you out of my property. Then if you want to evict a tenant because maybe you are fed up with the tenant's behavior, let us say, or you're done with that relationship, there's a way someone will stay. You might look for a new face or something, or the tenant is unable to pay his rent like the previous instances that we've given. Okay. What you ought to do is to give him the necessary notice. Now, the necessary notice will be the 6 months notice, 7 days notice to quit, and 7 days notice of owner's intention, as opposed to be giving the notice. After that notice has been given, the next step you will take is to file an action in court for recovery of premises. You file a claim in court with your particulars of claim and your ordinary summons. You get a bailiff of court, the bailiff that served the 7 days notice of owner's intention, to serve the claim in court too. Once the bailiff serves the claim on the tenant, then you know that that matter is to go for trial. Okay. The matter will be set down for hearing. You come to court, enter the witness box, give your evidence, your relationship with the tenant, how the tenant came into the property, how long the tenant has stayed, and the reason why you're sending the tenant out. If it's inability to pay, if it's some behaviors that you cannot condone and all of that, you state it. After you've done that, the bailiff will also state how he went about the service of the notice, because service of notice is important in chasing out of the tenant. Okay. Because anybody you're bringing to court must have sufficient notice of what you're doing. You cannot take person unawares. You take him in the dark, you just go behind him, you get an order of court. It doesn't work like that. So the person should at least have a right of fair hearing, a right to defend himself in court. So when you've been served, sometimes the court even goes ahead to order you to serve hearing notice if the tenant refuses to come. If all those have been complied with, the tenant refuses to come, then they'll give an order rejecting that tenant from there. That's when you see landlord in their best behavior. They'll come in, break the door, and jack all your things to court. So as a tenant, once you see that a matter has been filed against you, it is the best time that you also you run. You pack your things and you move. If you're waiting for that matter to be finished, you're stubborn. That's why, like I tell you, go to most magistrate court, you see people's properties there. People buy at giveaway prices because the tenant is stubborn. You're in the wrong and you want to still maintain
prove that you're right.
cannot be right. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I also want to ask, is there penalty for early termination?
Well, if you want to terminate someone's rent, there must be reasonable grounds, like I say. And you cannot just take someone's money. He has not enjoyed the duration of that tenancy, and you just want to take the money and fly. Good conscience demands that at least you pay him for the remainder of that rent. You understand? Because if you terminate, you bring someone else. If the action of the tenant is not so grievous, it has not caused the kind of damage that you cannot bear as an individual, you pay him the remainder of his rent and allow him to go his way. You understand? Because if you're terminating the rent, there are some times that the tenant might be very stubborn. I just write to them that within this period, we want you to vacate the premises. That's with the tenant's consent. Look for another place. We will give you the remainder of your rent, so you go. You understand? You can't just chase them. Their money is still reading. You understand? So you should come to an agreement. This is what it is. This is the period of months you have stayed. This is what I can give you. Look for another place, and everybody have their peace. Instead of, and like I told you, the mood of getting a tenant out of the house is cumbersome. So if you don't want to go into those stress, you call the tenant. If the tenant is reasonable, you reach a consensus and everything will work out fine.
Okay, so according to your explanation, you said notice is being given 6 months before the expiring of the initial rent paid.
Yes.
So I want you to know that notice normally, your house rent will expire now 6 months before it expire. There are some persons that are saying, even if I will pack out, you give me 6 months to pack out. The law backs that. So we tenants, we have our own challenges and our own.
But this area you've come is one area I want to clarify. I do meet a lot of tenants that, let's say, they are ignorant. They feel like they know the law, but they don't have an idea. You understand? So I sit them down and I explain to them. The law permits that 6 months notice should be given to you. That 6 months notice is ordinarily given together with the rent, and it expires on the day that your rent expires, except the person did not give the rent when he's supposed to. And if the person fails to give the rent when he's supposed to, and that rent expires, at the expiration of that rent, it is what we call a fluxion of time. It means you have no relationship with the landlord, because it is the rent that governs your relationship with the landlord. Once that time frame is gone, you will be entitled to 7 days notice to quit and 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover premises. If the landlord is gracious enough to want to give you 6 months notice after the expiration of your rent, then you should also bear in mind that you will pay for the 6 months. That it's not your father's house. You cannot just come and stay in someone's house for free. No, your papa. Even though you're asking for that notice and the person feels, I want to give you that notice, you will still pay, because there is no law that permits a tenant to stay in the landlord's house for free.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Anything you are doing, I better get lawyers friend so that they will clear your doubt. Make you don't go pay unnecessary money. Because sometimes we seem to know the law more than ourselves. So I have this question, which I have also experienced. Now, I packed into an apartment and I furnished the place. Initially when I went, I painted the place and everywhere was just looking good. Just for the landlord to get a new tenant and increase house rent. The following year, he said I shouldn't renew even when my money is available. In a case like that, what are you going to do as an individual?
Well, if you park into a place, you pimp it to your own taste. It doesn't stop the owner of the house to tell you to leave the house when he intends for you.
So it's mandatory that you must leave whenever he wants, as far as your rent has expired.
So long as you've been given the necessary notice, the house is. You should know that the house is not your own. Whatever you're doing, at the end of the day, without a written consent, except you want to demand, if you want to demand money for the things you have done, then it means there should be a written consent. But if you go ahead and furnish my house to look like Dubai, when I've not sent you, when I want you to leave, you will leave. And you will not take away anything. Because if you want to remove the things you've put, then you ensure that you leave the house
the way you met it.
The way you met it. So you know it's even more difficult to leave the house the way you met it than how you have made it. So for landlords, I want to say this by the way though, for landlords, it is good that you profile your tenants. You understand? When someone is coming, you ask them their source of livelihood. You ask them what they do for a living. They have a family, they give you contact of their other family members, and you have an idea. Because if anything happens in that property that is owned by you, you'll be called to answer. If someone dies in the property, definitely the landlord will be contacted. So if there's a kidnapping incident in that property, the government has the right of confiscating that property. You never get hold of it. So as a landlord, it is not just for you to put someone in the house because you built a house, you just put anybody there. If you put someone like that and anything happens, you bear the responsibility of that action that has taken place. So we should also know the kind of people we put in houses, and we should take our time, not just because of the money. Some people will just increase the rent to an astronomical sum, and they will be looking for people that can be able to pay. They don't even care whether they're into money ritual or they're into armed robbery or anything, so long as you can pay the rent. So you profile the persons that want to come into your property, so that tomorrow, if anything happens, you can come out and say, this is information, this is a step I took. This person was not like that before he got here. If there are changes that have occurred, I'm not his father to determine how he will live his life. So you understand? So that is how it works.
So what you're trying to say now is that, so if I happen to rent a house and I want to furnish it the way I want it, maybe the place was looking tattered and I decided to like change everything, I have to ask the landlord first before I take that decision. So I can't just take that decision on my own because I've already paid for it.
Well,
so I have the right to do it the way I want.
No, I'm not saying you don't have the right to do it the way you want.
I want to understand that.
You have the right to change it to look like heaven if you want. But the thing is, you shouldn't complain if the landlord, seeing what you have done, decides to increase your rent or ask you to leave. It's his property, you will leave. Do you understand?
Okay.
So if you want to do anything, upgrade the house to a certain extent, you ask for a written consent so that you don't just spend your money beautifying another person. And maybe you should have money. You have money and you want to spend money on someone's house. Yes, we would like it if you spend money like that. But because the law permits the landlord to do whatever he wants to do with his house, it's not your house. So you should know what you ought to do. If the house is not painted, of course, there's nothing that stops you from painting your house to your own taste. You can paint your house. Now, you know the law also gives the landlord the right to inspect his property. Now, the right of inspection of that property is when sufficient notice will be given to you, maybe a month's notice, week's notice, or thereabout, informing you that the landlord wants to inspect his property. And most times, most landlords come to inspect their house when they have this conviction that there are certain things that are going in that house that may be detrimental to them recovering possession from that tenant. Because if you do not inspect that house during the stay of that tenant, and that tenant packs out, how you know where that tenant is going to? If the caution fee that they've paid is not able to repair a house, what do you do? So the inspection, if you know how much you've invested in your house, you give the tenant maybe 6 months notice or 3 months notice and tell him, I'm coming to inspect the house. Every tenant is entitled to quiet possession. Quiet possession means you're supposed to live in that property without the interference of that landlord. But the law also gives the landlord the right to inspect the property without necessarily interfering with your quiet possession of that property.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have answered my question.
Thank you very much. Indeed, our viewers, is very, very necessary to have a lawyer as a friend so that they will be educating you in things like this. It's very, very important. NAIB, find one lawyer as your friend so that if he guide you out when you find yourself in this kind of situation. Sir, we have experienced so many things in the society, and likewise, like I want to use myself as an example. I packed into an apartment But before I packed into the apartment, landlord tell me say, I don't want you to smoke for this compound. If you are smoking, stay inside your room. Don't bring it outside. If you are washing, stay at the back of your house. Then if you are playing music, don't use your music to disturb your next neighbor. If you are bringing visitors, you shouldn't bring more than one visitor. Now, I want to ask, those kind of a situation, what can the tenant do in a case like that, since he has already paid for his comfort?
That is where the tenancy agreement comes in.
Okay.
When a tenancy agreement is given to you, it is your right to demand that some clauses or some terms be reviewed. You don't, like I said, you don't just go signing blindly. If you signed all these things that the landlord said you're going against it, then Oyo is your case. But if you go through the agreement, I say I'm not comfortable with this, I'm not comfortable. If you're a smoker, you must not smoke. But if you're a smoker and you know that it's going to affect your integrity as a smoker, you tell him, my lord, I must smoke. You understand? Whether I disturb others or not, it's not my business. But if there's a clause in that agreement preventing you from smoking outside, some landlords even say that you shouldn't smoke at all. There's some hotels you go to, you see no smoking here. People they smoke there, you go So it depends. If you say you should smoke in your house, you should be grateful that you're smoking indoors. But if you want to smoke outside, you know smoking is not good for people. Yeah. I don't even want to go to other because we all have different kind of lifestyle. We all have things that we are addicted to. Some people are addicted to porn, some people are addicted to masturbation. So if someone is addicted to smoking or drinking, brother, that's your business. But if the tenancy agreement states that you shouldn't do it at some certain places, which to me is even reasonable, then you have to comply with it.
Comply because you already agreed in the first place. So you have to comply.
You have to comply. Okay, but if the landlord just come arbitrarily, because some landlords just come and they'll be giving you rules and regulations. I say they are giving primary 2 students. They wake up one morning and say, Oyekatu, no, the way they work, I know they work pass 5 times in a day. Then my half kid, they say, don't come back here after 10 o'clock in the night. So the person has an emergency. How do you want? Sometimes you come back and the landlord has already locked the gate. The especially when it's even more troublesome if the landlord is staying with you. You just lock the gate and then you go back to where you're coming from as if it's primary 1, whereas you have paid for. So those things are things that you should agree on. And checkmate, you don't just go rushing to pay for a house. You have an agreement. And the tenants too, if there are more than one tenant in the property, you should also have meetings. Okay. You understand? When minds come together, the landlord will have no other option than to bow. If you have 4 or 5 tenants speaking the same, you cannot eject everybody. There are people that like that want to eject, but sometimes when you see a lot of persons making the same point, you might see reasons to it.
Okay. So, there is one thing we can never avoid as far as a group of people are staying in one particular location, which is what I call dispute. Now, if you have a case like that, and I want to ask if there is any way of tackling dispute resolution. If, for example, this is an apartment and we are up to 7 persons staying here, we have issues. What are the ways to curtail those conflicts without going out of place?
Well, there is no way you can have people in an enclave, a compound, or the premises, and you will not have issues. Even your brothers and sisters, people do fight.
Why I'm saying this is that it gets on compass, you just fight. The next thing police, landlord don't call. Or you never call settle on now, don't call police.
It depends on the kind of persons you meet. You get people like police well. So we go fight with them, we go avoid them. So for every compound, for every human interaction and relationship, you would have dispute, you have conflict. What makes us matured individuals is how we manage those conflicts. You understand? Because someone wants to be dragged in the mud doesn't mean we should all rub ourselves in the mud. Now, if you have a caretaker, definitely someone is getting on your nerves, you report the issue to the caretaker, who will now, if the problem cannot be resolved, escalate it to the landlord. And you know, if there are constant disagreement and dispute, constant fighting in the compound, it can also warrant the landlord to issue quick notice on that tenant to leave. Because as a landlord, you want your peace of mind after you let out your premises to tenants. You wouldn't want to be disturbed every time saying these tenants are fighting, this tenant. Of the truth, growing up, I've stayed in such compound where they exchange blood, they tear with carry finger like, not tear you, blood will come out. Or they'll cut you out, they'll bite, they'll bite you like winch like this. So I've lived in such compound and I know the trauma. It doesn't just cause trauma on the tenants, even their children also live. You can see how old I am, and you can see the experience that I'm remembering. People quarreling for no reason whatsoever. So tenants are always advised to live uh, in a cordial and harmonious relationship. During the COVID-19 period, there was a video that was in circulation where two men fought themselves to death. That was in one of the eastern states. You've not seen the video? No. They didn't even have issues between themselves. Their wives were quarreling. And I think it might be some pent-up emotions that they were trying to release. And everybody trying to prove that his manhood is enough for his wife. They came out and they were fighting. If you check online, you see the video. They were fighting like wrestlers, WWE standard. They take ball to back, whole life, everything. So they fought and bled till they died.
What about the wives? Where were they?
They be widows now. They look for new persons to service them. That's how it works. They were shouting, that's why they caused the problem and they did not die, but their husbands died. You see, it is just necessary that you avoid problem. If you see me in the compound where I stay, I live in someone's house. I mind my business. I interact with my neighbors when I ought to, but I don't get into anybody's bad side. If I go to work, I come back, I greet whom I'm supposed to greet. I do not maintain some kind of extra relationship that might lead to issues, but I'm a very calm and respectful person. So as a person, you ought to know how you interact with others to avoid conflict. You understand? Someone that doesn't need advice, you don't just say, I will advise you to do and kill you. You don't just advise, he doesn't want your advice, leave him alone. So you understand? Well, you don't preach to someone that doesn't want to be preached to. So,
okay, there's something that gives me like, what if now in a house you have like a neighbor that plays loud music, disturbing your sleep where you rented? Like the person's music is so loud that you cannot even sleep. So what is the best way to like solve that type of situation?
Well, you report to the people that hire. You report to the caretaker. If you see that the person is someone you can approach, if it's someone you can ordinarily approach, is to meet him and tell him this music is not okay. There are neighbors like that. Especially when I was in school environment, you see people playing music. Some of them might play it because they have a visitor and they don't want noise to listen. It's better than music disturb you than the other noise disturbs you. So allow them to play their music. But sometimes, if you're not comfortable,
very, very annoying.
Sometimes you want to read, or sometimes you want to pray. You've not prayed for a while, you want to pray and they are playing music, or you want to sleep, you have a headache, you want to sleep. There are instances like that. So what you do, report to the caretaker of that compound and you take it up with the landlord.
Okay, why don't you talk to the person himself? The person playing
no, like I said, you can approach the person if he's approachable.
Okay.
If you go and approach Yokozuna and they break your head, it's not the madam inside there and break your head. So that nuisance itself can serve as a basis for the landlord to ask that tenant to leave, because your right to stay in that compound does not permit you to stand as a nuisance to other tenants.
Okay. Going back to the law. Now,
Mm.
sir, I want to ask, is there any law in Nigeria Constitution or River State Amendment Bill that deals with tenancy law?
Yes, we have recovery of premises laws and acts. You know, we have the act is for national. Then when the state decides to make them a part of their legislation, it becomes a law since in the state. We have the Tenant and Landlord Law of Rivers State, 1990, whether 1997 or 1999. That's how long it has been. Recently, the Lagos state government enacted, or will I say, they reviewed their tenancy laws to also include the fact that the landlord is not supposed to increase the rent beyond certain percent, maybe 70% or thereabout. The increase in rent should be reasonable. And they also set up a committee that will also be responsible to entertain complaints when the tenants feel aggrieved based on the increase in rent. And if even though the tenant's rent has expired and that matter is being entertained, that tenant will still be in possession of that property until that matter is determined. So they also take into cognizance the prevailing rents in that area, which is, if it's 1 bedroom, what is the price of 1 bedroom around that area? It will also determine what the rent is. But if your rent is below that amount, in order to get there, you must take it gradually to get there, because you don't just increase it full blown. You're dealing with humans here. So various laws, but like I told you, everything we've been discussing from the inception till now covers what the law states about landlord and tenant. As a tenant, what you ought to do is to pay your rent when you're supposed to pay it. Once you pay your rent when you're supposed to pay it, then the law shields you. But if you're in arrears of rent and you're still claiming rights, you have a long way to go. Then go pack your property, go drop for court. So you cannot be in the wrong and be claiming right. Once you have paid your rent and the landlord wants to oppress you, then the law will be set in motion to favor you. But if you have not paid your rent, you're already in disobedience of the law. So I don't know what you want.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I want you to help in this particular question. I think on how we are going to go about this thing is still about the law. I want to know, is there any specific law that guides the landlord? Like tenancy agreement law is there, or tenancy law is there. But I want to ask, is there any law that guides like the landlord that this one is to stipulate all the things landlord will do concerning an apartment?
But the tenancy laws governs every relationship,
Okay.
both the landlord and tenant. Now, some rights of the landlord, rights to receive rent. He also has the right to review his rent, that's increase his rent. He also has the right to repossess his property after the tenancy is due. He also has the right to go and, what is it called? Visit the property, or what's the term now?
With prompt notice.
Yes, inspect the property. Yes, that's right. Then those are several rights to a landlord. The tenant has the right to stay in the property, enjoy quiet possession. He has the right to keep the property in good shape. You understand? He also has the right for the landlord not to interfere with his right of enjoyment, then to be given adequate notices too.
Okay.
So he's entitled to adequate notices. So the laws present this atmosphere for both the landlord and the tenant to have a cordial relationship. Everybody know their rights and their obligation, things you're supposed to do, things you're not supposed to do. You don't damage a landlord's property. You keep it well. Then you cannot eject a tenant without the necessary notices. Then you cannot increase rent arbitrarily. Then any increment of rent, you must serve the necessary notices. So these laws guides the relationship. If you go outside any of these laws, of course, you have a field day in court.
Okay, thank you
It's
so
good
much.
we are talking about this because some people don't know anything about laws. They don't even know that there are even laws to this. They just take things, do things anyhow. So this has really opened our minds to know that there are laws to different things. So we have to know different laws towards tenancy and agreement. And relationship is very, very important between the tenant and the landlord. This is very, very eye-opening.
All
Okay.
right. So, sir, we want to say a very big thank you for the clarifications and any other stuff. But I want our viewers, especially me, I want to say that whatever you are doing, make sure you know the legal aspect of it and normal mutual aspect of gentleman agreement. Now, I want you to advise our viewers, both the tenants and the landlords. What advice do you have for them when they find themselves in such situations?
Well, like we've been saying from the inception, landlord, be good to your tenant. Do not, do not increase rent arbitrarily. Ensure that any rent increase should be reasonable, and you should also consider the times that we are in. Things are economic meltdown and all of that. And the tenants are humans, have responsibilities and all. Also put them into consideration. I know the house is yours and you want to make profit from the house you've built. Some persons might build a house because of the legal matters and all. They might not even recover the money that they've spent on that house. Either they will just keep spending and spending. So, landlord, if you're good to your tenants, the tenants will be good to you. Interact with them, make them feel like humans. And the tenants will even look out for your own interest. Then the tenants, when you're supposed to pay your rent. Don't take your rent to go and do something else. The rent is very important. As human, one of our basic needs is to have shelter on our head.
Oh.
If you no get shelter, if you stay outside, be madman. You understand? So, in order not to be a madman, you must make provision for your shelter. And that rent is important. Whatever you're doing, ensure that your rent is there to be paid at the appropriate time. And the way you handle people's property will also determine how others will handle your own property when you get your own property. So the things that you cannot do in your property, don't do it in another man's property. Ensure that you look out for the interests of the landlord. And as much as you can, try to build a cordial relationship with your landlord. And I don't think there is any issue between a landlord and a tenant that can ordinarily not be resolved.
All right. So, thank you very much. I believe our viewers, they have taken your advice and it is very, very important. No matter what, have a cordial relationship with your landlord, and landlords have a cordial relationship with your tenants. Take them as yours so that they will take you as theirs too. Also, to special advice to tenants, no matter what you do, protect your landlord's property. No matter what you do, protect the property. Take it as yours. The way you take people's property, that is how they will take yours. So I want to say a very big thank you to our guest and my co-host. Also, too, this topic is not basically for tenants or for landlord. We are talking about the two aspect of it, both the landlord and the tenant. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much and God bless you.